One of the most disturbing elements of the Prohibition War is how it's made police the enemy of otherwise law-abiding cannabis consumers. Fortunately, one group of police officers knows the futility of prohibition and reaches out to educate the community and current law enforcement. Today, the Russ Belville Show visits with another speaker from Law Enforcement Against Prohibition with one clear message: cops say legalize drugs.
Welcome back, everybody. 31 past the hour, and we're joined by Dwayne Sessom. He's a former deputy sheriff in Lawton, Oklahoma, also a former corrections officer. And Dwayne, welcome to the show. Oh, let's try that again. Dwayne, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Russ. Good to be here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. I have to push the mute button, and then it works a whole lot better.
Okay.
Glad to have you here, though. I was just looking over your career here on the LEAP website, and it points out that you've been involved in law enforcement in one way or another since the age of 23. What was it that made you want to be in law enforcement?
Well, I guess basically I just wanted to help people and try to make a difference in my community, because I've always just been that way. You know, my parents raised me to have good manners and, help the old lady across the street and whatnot. And I've always just liked to help people and be involved in the community. And so that's why I'm with LEAP now.
So your first job at the age of 23 here says you worked as a correction officer for the Comanche County Jail in Lawton, Oklahoma. A county jail in Oklahoma must have given you a lot of insight as to what's going on in this war on drugs, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. Because you're in there. The sheriff called it the lion's den, because we were right there in the cells with the prisoners sometimes, and it didn't really take me too long to figure out that a lot of the guys that were in there for, possession of marijuana or small amounts of cocaine or whatever, they weren't really bad guys. They were just people, just like me, and they just were in there because they had broken the law, but they weren't bad guys at all.
Yeah, and we find that these guys who get involved, get caught for marijuana or small quantities of other drugs, then get housed with the guys who really are the bad guys. What kind of effect did that have on those drug inmates?
Well, that's a really good point. There were small time offenders like such of marijuana, or maybe a guy that had a DUI, thrown in the same cell, with a guy that committed murder. And that really bothered me too, because you're talking about two different kinds of people. And, and I have seen, violence, guys that are violent in there that hurt. And actually we had one guy killed when I was working there because he refused to give his food to another guy when he was arrested for DUI. That was really bothersome, because it should never happen. The guy shouldn't have been there, in the cell with a guy that was in for murder, and there were several of them. We had holding cells that had about 20 people in it, and he was put into one of those. So, yeah, that's really wrong. It shouldn't ever happen that way.
Yeah, that's pretty sobering when you hear stuff like that. And, of course, over time, it looks like you've come to realize that this war on drugs wasn't working. Obviously, you're working with LEAP now. But according to your bio here, there's kind of a personal aspect to this as well, where we see how the arrest for a marijuana violation can really wreck someone's life.
Right. This happened after I had already retired from the sheriff's department. I had two teenage sons, and one of them was pulled over, and he and his cousins had a small amount of marijuana, probably maybe 1 or 2 grams left. It's most of it, but they only charged my son because he was the oldest, and he claimed responsibility for it. He said it was his weed. But anyway, what happened is even with the small amount, and he had no prior record whatsoever. The kid had never been in trouble before, and they took his driver's license away for 6 months and charged him $1,000 fine. I mean, it's good that they didn't give him any jail time because he had just turned 18. They could have put him in jail, but they didn't. But suspending his driver's license for 6 months was devastating because the kid had a job. He paid for his own car insurance and payment, and he couldn't then get back and forth to his job. So I ended up having to take him, or his mother had to take him to work and back every day. And he did actually pay that $1,000 fine by himself from the money he made from work, but it really drained him because the kid was only making minimum wage, and it's just horrible. I mean, a kid should never go through that. And so that really opened my eyes to the way the system works. And I got to tell you, Oklahoma probably is one of the worst states, if not the worst, when it comes to marijuana arrests and the penalties that they impose.
Yeah, that's something that we've been following here for a while. We reported on your Governor Fallon there signing that bill that can put someone away for life for a second, I think it's a second possession of hash charge. Yeah,
and Oklahoma has a zero tolerance. They also passed the marijuana DUI law, or the THC DUI law, that they can test your blood, urine, or even saliva, and if you have THC or any metabolite of THC, which as you know can last in your body for months sometimes, depending on how much you use. But the point is, you don't even have to be impaired. It can just be in your body, blood, urine, saliva, and they can charge you with DUI. I mean, and that's pretty much akin to having a beer last Saturday and you get pulled over. Today's Thursday, and you get charged for DUI because you drank a beer on the weekend. It's ridiculous.
It is absolutely ridiculous. And we're speaking with Dwayne Sessom. He's a former deputy sheriff in Lawton, Oklahoma. We had also reported on the case of Patricia Spotted Crow, who got 12 years for dealing like $31 worth of weed. I understand she's out now, but Oklahoma's a tough place. They're not messing around. So how does that affect you trying to spread this word about ending not just prohibition of marijuana, but all drugs and having them regulated?
I'm ready to move to Colorado.
I'll bet you are.
Now, another point I wanted to bring up, though, is this with this new law that, the cops are really watching people with Colorado license plates now. And I do still have friends that are in law enforcement, and, so I do hear, what gets told to them, and they were actually told to, look for Colorado license plates because it's illegal in Colorado, and they will, drive here for whatever reason, and they might pull them over and get a DUI arrest out of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I mean, it does happen, yeah. And I foresee it happening more and more.
Oh, yes. We're going to get profiling for Colorado plates in Wyoming, in Oklahoma. We're already hearing about profiling for Oregon and Washington plates in Idaho and Utah and places like that. So this will be an interesting development as these drug laws change, because, again, like you say, you could be doing something completely legal in Denver and a week later be driving to Tulsa and get busted for a DUI.
Right.
It's just...
And that... that just blows my mind. I mean, we're just, it seems like Oklahoma is going backwards. And, most of the other states, 20 plus DC now, have, legalized in some form or another. And Oklahoma's cracking down. It blows my mind. And it does really make it hard for guys like me to speak in public and try to convince people that this is not the way things should be done. Actually, I take that back. Most people do agree with what I say when I speak publicly, but for some reason our legislators do the opposite. So this is a disconnect that I just don't quite understand. I've even talked to Senator Cole, and he didn't really even want to talk about it. I mean, he was nice and cordial, but he just did not want to talk about legalizing marijuana on any level. Pretty much just got the hand.
And this is even for if you bring up medical use, which is usually popular somewhere.
I'm sorry?
I said this happens even bringing up something as benign as medical use for cancer patients. They're still talk to the hand.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. They really don't want to talk about it. And I don't really understand the mentality, I guess, because there are a lot of conservatives in Oklahoma, of course, and just like in Texas, but I think Oklahoma probably is a little bit more conservative still. But I talk to conservatives all the time who agree that medicinal cannabis should be legalized. And, of course, probably 99% of the liberal people that I talk to totally agree with it. But for one reason or another, it's still in vogue to, have this war on drug mentality when you're a legislator. We only have maybe one or two legislators here in Oklahoma that I know of who have even, tried to introduce medicinal marijuana laws, and they're kind of just in a helpless minority right now. So I'm looking at different angles to try to change the status quo right now, because we're just, like I said, we're going backwards, and Mary Fallon is definitely not helping things at all. So.
Yeah. I'd be interested in seeing some of the numbers out of Oklahoma. We just saw that public policy poll come out in Texas, where they found 58%. And even when they broke it down based on Republican or conservative or older, they were finding majority or plurality support for marijuana legalization, or at least decriminalization. I can't imagine that the numbers would be much different in Oklahoma. Do you think there's majority support for at least medical or legal or decrim there?
In my personal experience, absolutely yes, because I honestly, when I talk to people, and even, if they're opposed before I talk to them, usually I've changed their mind after we're done, because a lot of it is just that people lack education. They just really are clueless about the facts, and they're still kind of brainwashed to just say no back in the Reagan era, and all they need is a little bit of education, and they are for it. So I think really that's the biggest issue that I run into, is just people really aren't educated about it. And they still see marijuana as a bad drug that should be Schedule 1, just keep it off keep it away from our kids and whatnot. And then I have to explain to them that, look, the kids are, if you're worried about kids getting marijuana, they're going to have a lot harder time getting it if it's legalized. And it's just like Colorado, it's pretty much like alcohol. So it's going to be harder to get because drug dealers don't ask for an ID.
Right. Absolutely. Well, I want to thank you for helping get that education